Hi everybody, and welcome back to Plastic Models by Regular Dude and part 2 of the Plastic Models for Beginners Tamiya 135th scale Panzer Kampfwagen 38T. So in this episode we're going to start with choosing which kit I'm going to do. And I think since most of the kits that I've seen built have been this one here, I think I'm going to go for this one here. So I'm going to go for kit B. So first thing to do is get these parts cut off and ready to go for assembly. So I need looks like all the parts here come from the C sprue. So let's get sprue C here and cut these parts off. So real quick, I'm going to talk about the difference between the cutters here. Now this is a real common cutter you can find just about anywhere, and they're good cutters. I used them for a long time before I switched. The only difference between these and these, well, there's a few differences. Number one, you can see the angle of the blades here are much more steep compared to these. So this allows these to cut through the plastic a little easier. For example, when I cut through this piece of plastic here with these sprue cutters, it flies, and it's more of a pinch on one side and a cut on the other, which isn't necessarily bad, but it does put a lot of stress on the plastic. As you can see here, it's white because it's been stressed. Okay, so that is the big difference between this one and this one, which when you cut with this, and I wouldn't normally cut plastic this big, but this just to show you what it does, it cuts it much cleaner. It's still a little bit white there and stressed, but as you can see on this side here, it's a much more clean cut. So there's not as much stress on the plastic. So what that does is gives you a cleaner cut and allows you to cut closer to the part. So there's less cleanup. So what I usually do with parts is I'll cut them out a ways from the part, like this, and then I'll get it right up against and cut it, and you get a nice clean, most of the time, nice clean cut with little to no or cleanup with a sanding stick. So you get nice, smooth, clean cuts. Now some things this won't work on as well because, you know, curves or whatever, but for the most part, this is the way I like to do it. Okay, so that is part C1. C2 is this bulkhead piece here. For some parts, I'll even cut it right off the sprue like that, but generally I won't. That's just an example. Now see, because this was on the sprue, didn't cut quite as clean, but that is okay because I can use my sanding stick to clean it up like that. So that's 2. Then we need C3, which is this one here. Now, for the sake of time, I'm not going to demonstrate all this cleaning and cutting and sanding and all that kind of stuff for every part, unless something notable comes up, like, you know, maybe a different way I would do it, or some way to do it that's easier for a given part. But for this few steps, that's what I'm going to do. So there's a little bit of a burr there. Now you got to be careful because right here there are some raised tabs. So I'm going to use a smaller sanding stick Also use a file. Get that sanded down smooth like that. Then up here where I cut this one off, try and maintain the radius of this curve here. Get that sanded down. Get that one sanded down. And you just want to do enough to get it smooth. You don't want to go too far because you could change the way the part fits. Okay, so there's that one. Same thing with this one. And part C23. Whoops. Now this one you want to be careful on because these parts are angled. So I like to lay my cutter on the angle and then cut it off like that. Nice and clean. Okay, so with all those parts cut, now we can glue them together. So using my Tamiya extra thin. Now this is a step where it gives you an order in which to glue things together. So the first thing to glue is part C23, which is this part that glues on the front. Now it's kind of nice because the way this is made, you can't glue it upside down. Okay, and there's two things, there's reasons why, because you have these little slots here for another detail, match up with those holes. This is L-shaped here, this raised part that connects in here. So if you were to try and put it upside down, it's not going to lay flat because that L-shaped part is going to hit on that little stop right there. So that means you can only glue it one direction. So a quick note on Tamiya extra thin. Now you don't have to do this, but it does help. Oftentimes you'll see people take Tamiya extra thin and put it on the part that they're going to glue onto another part, and then they'll stick together. Most of the time it works just fine. However, if you have something that takes a little bit of finagling to fit, you could run into trouble because this stuff evaporates really quickly. So the best way to glue these together is to use capillary action using the brush and run it along the seam that you're doing. Now, in looking at this part, I think I've changed my mind on how I'm going to glue this. Part of it I'm going to glue with the Tamiya extra thin. Part of it I'm going to use this here. Not necessary, I could use extra thin on all of it, but I want to make sure that, because there's supposed to be a natural, since these parts are bolted together, there should be a seam there, and I don't want that being filled up and looking like a solid piece, because this glue will melt it together and make it look solid. So I'm going to use this instead. Now first, these parts right here contact, I believe, the front of the hull. So I put a little bit there, put a little bit there, trying to put enough and put it toward the back side so it doesn't squeeze out the front like that. Then I can put it in place like that. Okay, so that's fit on there nicely. Now now where I can use the Tamiya extra thin is right along this seam here. All I'm going to do, just run it right along the edge like that. Capillary action will pull the cement down inside of there to give you a nice strong bond without having to worry about it evaporating before it does its thing. Make sure it's lined up good. And voila. So number 2, the next part is to glue C2, which is this one here. It doesn't have a front and back. It's just, it can go either way. It's just got these little notches here that will fit here. So the nice thing about these Tamiya kits is that when you put this in place, it is pretty solid. It doesn't move around much. So that means it's going to be lined up 90-degree angle with the lower hull here, the bottom of the hull. So then just put a little bit of cement here and here and here and here. Then third step is to glue the side panels into place. Now as you can see here, these fit on the side like this. So you have a number of points that kind of control where the part is going to be. This part here with the notch that I showed earlier from that centerpiece. Then there is kind of a slot, an angled slot here that matches up with this piece here. So again, to me, it almost makes it impossible to screw it up. But it fits like that, and then this part here in the back will be above this bolt detail here. So, ta-da, just like that. Spectacular. And you know you'll have a nice square construction because this will keep the sides perpendicular to the bottom. So I'm going to start in the back here. I've got it in place. Again, using the Tamiya extra thin. I'm just going to run it along the seam right here. Again, just let it be drawn in. Same here. Same there. Then make sure that's all lined up. See, this front plate lines up with a gap here. So make sure that's lined up. Hold that in place. Cement there and there. All along there. And there, and that will give you a nice solid joint. Okay, hold it together, make sure it sets upright, and bingo. So then do the other side. And there we have step 1 complete. The lower hull is assembled. So step 2 is to install the upper plates. So we've got B9, B20, and C14. So let's get C14 first. B9 and B20. Okay, so this doesn't give a specific order to do it, so I'm going to start with the front, Again, this is a part that you would not be able to easily install incorrectly. There's a couple of notches here, none over there. So if you tried to put it in backwards, it's not really going to fit right. So you have to do it like this. Bingo. Works like a champ. So again, this is a place where man, it just snaps into place. Whew, nice. So this is a place where I'm going to use this glue instead. And I could use the Tamiya extra thin and just put a bead down in there and stick it on there, but I'm using this instead. Same thing. Just a little dab. Spread it out a little bit because this doesn't dry as fast. So there's not the likelihood that it's going to dry before you can get the part in place. Then I think just like that. Okay, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the extra thin, and to apply it to this part, I'm going to touch it underneath this edge here and let capillary action pull it through. And again, it won't mess up that seam detail there that's supposed to be there. If it was supposed to be a smooth edge, then the glue would be good because it would fill that in, and you might just have to do a little sanding to smooth it out. So we got that in place. Then the next part is the upper hull deck. And again, there's a little key there, a little notch there. So that will ensure that it's lined up properly. Just like that. So now I'm putting it in place. I can see that there is a little bit of sprue left right there because that's closed up and it shouldn't be. So using my handy dandy sanding stick, actually I'm going to use this big one because it'll get it all nice and even. Make sure that's sanded down. Got another one right there. That looks good. So, place there. All looks good. So what I'm going to do, same thing. I'm going to apply the cement underneath right here. Both sides. Like that. There. There. And that should hold it really well. So I'm going to squeeze it together to make sure it's butted up against this. Like that. All right, and then next we can put this part on. Same thing. There's a ring right there that fits in that hole there, and then the sides fit on these lips. So it will fit like that. Now there's some angles there, so what you want to do is make sure that it's pressed down and the sides are squeezed together. So for this, since I have a big surface area here, I'm going to go ahead and use some of this cement. Put that in place like that. Get a little bit of this liquid cement there and there. hold it down, squeeze it together, make sure it lines up properly. That way all the seams and edges are even. Okay, so now we can move on to step 3. Step 3 is the back plate C13 and this grill here for the engine, I would assume, C21. Okay, and there's no specified order, so I'm going to do it like this. Here. Normally I would be using the Tamiya extra thin on parts like this, but as I said earlier, the way these particular tanks were constructed, there were plates bolted and or riveted together, so you don't want to fill those gaps up. There we go, just like that. See, there should be a seam along there, seams there, because they're all bolted in together plates. Now another trick you can do is if you have a hole or something that you can access the inside, I like to have a dedicated brush for cement. Something with a long handle. That way, now this one's kind of big, but it's the only one I got right now. I don't know where my smaller one is. That way I can stick it inside the vehicle and run a bead of cement along the inside contact point without it seeping through to the outside. Like that. So then, take this part here. There's two sides. This side, some big old ejector pin marks from the parts being pushed out of the mold. It's also got these little tabs here which help line it up. That's the bottom side. This side here is the detail side. You can see the bolts. Angled, so they fit right in there like that. Okay, so once again, I'm going to use this cement. If I get too much, just use my toothpick to remove some of it, because I don't want it seeping out. So like that. And then pop the part in place like that. And voila, there you go. Alright, so the next part we need is the photo etch part. So, we got the part out of its little bag, and now we got to cut it off of this part here, which is called the fret. Now what I do is I have an X-Acto knife and I've got it marked PE. That way I know it's an older blade, and I don't really care if it gets dulled by cutting metal. Some people use glass, some people use stuff like that. I just use my cutting mat here. And then you just get it up as close to the part as you can and cut it thusly. Okay, and if there's a little bit of a burr on it, then I take a file. You can also use sandpaper, and very carefully and very gently, without much pressure, sand it off. Now, if you have some smooth jaw pliers or something similar, it helps, and it lessens the potential for bending the part. And I'll show you an example. I've got this Tamiya photo etch bending tool, but I mainly use it to hold the part like that, real close to the edge. That way I don't have to worry about bending the part as much. Use my file, and you can feel it with your hand. Your fingerprints will catch on it if it's still there. All right, so there's that cleaned up. So now all I have to do is put it in place on the grill. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get my tweezers. Now there is a top and a bottom side. You may not be able to see it. Let's see if I can show you. Hopefully you can see that the mesh on this side is kind of recessed from the framework as compared to this side. This side's perfectly flat. This side is textured. That's the side you want to have up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to see how it fits here. And it looks pretty good. So for this, I'm going to use my slow dry CA glue, cyanoacrylate. What I do is I put a little bit on something. You can use a piece of paper, a piece of foil, a piece of plastic, whatever. And then using a toothpick. Now the reason I'm using this is because it gives me time to work. You can also use stuff just like regular old Elmer school glue. There's also other PVA type glues like Gator's Grip acrylic hobby glue. I've used that before. For this one, I'm going to use this, and that's because I have time to work. So take a little bit and just dab just a little tiny bit at a few contact points around the edges, like that. Okay, and then carefully, ever so carefully. Now see, I'm lucky in a place like this because I have something I can butt it up against. Line it up as good as I can and drop it in place, and then slide it into alignment. That is what I like about that glue. Voila. So there it is. So that takes care of all of the lower hull parts up to this point. So I think since we're about almost 40 minutes into this, I'm going to call it quits with this video right here. So next time in part 3, when we come back, we'll start with step 4, which is the suspension arms on the lower hull. And then we'll get on into wheels and stuff like that. So that's going to end part 2 right here. So thanks for watching Plastic Models by a Regular Dude and the Plastic Models for Beginners series, Tamiya 1/35 scale Panzer Kampfwagen 38T. So until next time, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, hints, tips, anything like that, anything you want to know, put them in the comment section down below and I will answer you as quickly as I can. So until next time, I will see you all later.